ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attack on a Christmas market in Berlin that left at least 12 people dead and dozens more injured. But many questions remain over who carried out the attack. The man arrested on the suspicion of driving the truck through the crowd has been released from police custody. Authorities said they did not have sufficient evidence. And now this latest attack in Europe is prompting fear of possible attacks here at home this holiday season. Paul Viollis, CEO of Viollis Group, which specializes in security services, is here. All right, so Paul, let me ask you about the fact that there was actually a warning put out by the State Department before this Berlin attack. It was in late November, warning about these kinds of open-air places during the holiday season, Americans who might be traveling abroad. What are the challenges as you look at these kinds of locations in protecting them against attacks like this?
It's a great question. I mean, think first of all, when we talk about the warning signs. So Al-Qaeda came out in October and sent a very clear message calling upon all jihadists worldwide to think global but act local. And they also said use vehicles as weapons of mass destruction to mow down the infidel. That was the message, which then in turn was delivered locally. What we can really start looking at to do at this point is think of each special event as a box, and there are layers of security. So when you look at what happened in Nice and what we learned there, and you look again at what happened in Berlin, there was an outer perimeter that vehicle should never have breached. And as simple as putting Jersey barriers around those streets to block that area off, that vehicle would never have gotten in.
Yeah, so that's one of those things. And I guess as we watch these kinds of situations unfold, and investigators still are very early on, in fact, they haven't gotten a suspect yet, what is the concern for you as you are looking at the sort of threats as they're evolving, right? You talk about these barriers, people who are thinking nefarious thoughts will hear that and say, well, there's a way around that, then we have to plan for that as well.
My biggest concern is that as a group, as entities, as venues, we're not getting it yet. We're still not appreciating the totality of the risk, the level of vulnerability, and the actions we need to be taking. You know, it's funny, this morning I'm doing a radio interview from my apartment, and I'm looking down over Columbus Circle, and I'm looking at all these incredible shops, right by Central Park South. And you can come right off 8th Avenue with a vehicle and do the same exact thing. My point in answer to your question is, the thing that really concerns me is the fact that we're not getting it yet. We need to be less concerned with optics and much more concerned with presenting a tiered level of security around special events, especially around the holiday season.
So NYPD's Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism, John Miller, said they've developed a relationship with truck rental companies to alert them if a truck is stolen or a driver is suspicious. Describe for me the kinds of things that law enforcement officials can do to try and think about what the possible avenues might be for terrorists and what the kinds of things that John Miller has talked about.
So what John's talking about is the same thing that we see on the national and local intelligence level. We get really good, solid intel, believe it or not. And what we're looking for is to mitigate the risk at the door. We don't want people to actually arrive. So we're using that intelligence and we're combining it with the trajectory of risk, where we foresee people coming and how we foresee them coming at us. And then we set up that perimeter even further. The best example I can give you, Lane, is this. Do you remember when we had the Super Bowl here in New York? And everybody was complaining about the fact that the perimeter was pushed back. Well, nothing happened, did it? Nothing whatsoever, because you couldn't get close. That's really the biggest concern, is making sure that we use the information, the intelligence, in a preemptive way to increase that perimeter and make it safer so that people like terrorist groups such as this, that when they're trying to come at us at special events, they can't get close. We have to attack it further out.
You know, in a free and open society, though, how do you protect against these kinds of attacks, considering all the soft targets that are out there in a place like New York City, for instance?
Well, in any place. I mean, we can be in Topeka, Kansas. I mean, how do we protect the local movie theater? There's only a certain amount of things that we can do. We certainly don't want to live in fear, but we want to be reasonable about it. And what we want our viewers to understand is that if we take more control over understanding what the risk is and take more reasonable steps towards it, for example, when you see something, say something, right? We've talked about this. What is something? What does that mean? Let's do a better job on the law enforcement side, the public side, to educate our viewers as to what something is. If you go to London and you leave a backpack in that department store, they're going to clear the store. If you do it here, someone's either going to steal it or going to hand it to you. We need to change our thought process as to how we're going to handle terrorism on American soil. But once we do that, we're going to be a whole lot safer.
What about taking a step back here, talking about ideology? You mentioned al-Qaeda encouraging smaller scale attacks.
Right.
What essentially you think is the solution when you take this from a 30,000-foot view, not just preventing individual attacks?
The biggest picture is really re-engineering our cultural thinking as it pertains to the probability of risk of happening on our soil. That's really our biggest issue. The moment that we recognize the fact that we are in the embryonic stage of a holy war, and with jihadists, not with Muslims, but with jihadists, big difference, right? Then and only then will we be able to collectively work together to make it a whole lot safer, soft targets and hard targets.
All right, Paul Viollis, thanks so much.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.